All right. A few years ago, Business Today did a survey asking people who were actually at work doing their job, hey, how you doing? Want to take a guess at what the number one answer was? Survey says, I'm tired. I'm tired. Or some variation of that. They heard words like, I'm busy, I'm so busy, I'm crazy busy. I'm swamped, I'm slammed, I'm spread pretty thin, I'm juggling a lot right now. Got a lot on my plate, I'm running behind, I'm catching up, I'm tied up, I'm covered up. And I'm sure that as you have had conversations with me and said, hey, preacher, how's your week been? I've used probably all of those variations at some time or another. In fact, I started to realize that as I started working on this sermon. I'm a few weeks ahead in my preparations, and so I was putting this message together, and I was really struggling with the fact that my default answer was always just busy, because I'm a very busy individual, and it was always busy. I'm so busy, and I caught myself as I was preparing this to say, you know what, you say that all the time. And so Brandon, my son-in-law, he knew that I was struggling with this, because he came up, I think it was a men's dinner, and he said, so how you doing? And I started to say busy, and I stopped. And he said, you want to say busy, don't you? And I said, yeah. So he's been trying to help coach me a little bit on not saying busy and coming up with other words, other alternatives, to just force myself to think differently about everything that's going on in my life in the week. And so making some progress on that. But, the truth of the matter is that on any given day, if I'm honest, I will quite often find myself to say, you know what, I'm tired. I'm just tired. I'm tired. And maybe some of you here can relate to that. Maybe some of you here know exactly that feeling, to say, you know what, so am I, preacher, so am I. Back when the leaders of the world thought that the best way to control COVID was just to shut everything down and force people into isolation, all of a sudden, people's calendars weren't so busy anymore, right? It was kind of like a forced rest on the world. Whether you wanted it or not, there was this, hey, you're not going to be as busy as you once were. There was going to be a break from the normal busyness of life, because people just weren't able to do what they were doing previously. The schedules that they had were no longer packed to the max. And yet, as the pandemic wound down, folks started getting out and about, and as they began to start putting their lives back together as such, they were surprised to find out that even though their schedules weren't as busy anymore, they were still exhausted. Exhausted to the point where they felt more exhausted than they did before the calendars weren't as packed. And you say, well, why is that? And the reason is because in a lot of ways, we can wear ourselves out through all kinds of means and methods. There are many ways to wear ourselves down. There are many ways for us to become exhausted. And I'm sure many of you have felt that. Maybe you're feeling that right now, this sense of being overwhelmed, this sense of being tired, of just all around worn out. And if that's you today, then I want to encourage you, because you're in the right place this morning. Because what we're going to see is that Jesus invites all of us to come to Him for rest. All too often we look for ways to soothe our soul, to distract our minds from the exhaustion that it feels, and yet Jesus calls out and He invites us to turn to Him for the only true rest that we will ever have, that satisfies, that refreshes, that renews us from the inside out. Last week, we introduced the idea of living with an intentional movement to a specific beat. That didn't last very long, did it? We were talking about the rhythm of life, right? That there's this intentional beat that we want to be purposeful about. We learned that God as the Creator, God as the Good Shepherd, He established these rhythms for us as His creation, as His sheep. And when we begin to align ourselves as followers of Jesus to God's beat for our lives, we'll find that it doesn't take very long for us to realize that the rhythm that we're moving to now in His way, in His plan, in His ideal, is going to be very different than the rhythm of the rest of the world. And in fact, if our lives if they don't move differently than the rest of the world, this is a warning, folks. If our lives are not moving differently, if we are not living to a different rhythm than the rest of the world, then that ought to be a caution flag. That ought to be a red flag. That ought to be something that says, hey, if my life is no different than the rest of the world, how is Jesus making a difference in my life? And we need to think about that. Now, in Genesis 1, we saw that God built certain rhythms into creation, and that there is this beat that He calls us to live to, and if we honor that beat, we will experience rest. We will experience renewal. If we don't honor that, then we will find ourselves worn out. And one of the things that's a bit different now than maybe 10 or 15 years ago, we kind of introduced this last week, is that not only are we wearing ourselves out with packed schedules, but we also are now dogpiling on top of that a busy schedule. That's not enough. Let's also throw on some distractions. So we have a distracted mind. And like, any moment that we have to catch our breath, what do? We stick a device in our face, trying to catch up on this, trying to find out about that, right? And if you don't think that you're guilty of that, as people say, I don't really look at my phone all that much. I'm really not all that dependent on my phone. I don't know about Android, but if you have an iPhone, there's a screen time thing. And I've got mine set to email me. Every week it sends me a report that tells me how much time I've spent on my phone. Do that. Have it send you that report. Take a look and just see how often you are on your phone. There was a survey done in 2023. The average American will check their phone 144 times today. That's at least once every 5 minutes. You will touch your phone 2,600 times today. But actually checking it, putting your mind into it, thinking about what's going on, you will check it 144 times today. And on an average, the average American today will spend 4 hours and 25 minutes looking at their phone. Now think about that. Can you imagine the kind of nap that you could have in 4 hours and 25 minutes if you just put your phone down? Right? But we don't do that. We keep exposing ourselves to the things that add weight and stress and mental fatigue to our already tired bodies. So it's not just a busy schedule anymore, it's also the distracted mind. And it is so hard for us to slow down. We were just I think Wendell and I were talking about that just a little bit this morning before church started, right? It's hard for us to slow down. We're running wide open. So let me give you a quick quiz. Ask you some questions here. Raise your hands if you've got an answer here, all right? See if any lights come on. See if anything registers or clicks here. So, by show of hands, have you ever seen a line at an intersection and decided to cut through a gas station or cut through a parking lot to avoid having to sit at that light? Anybody guilty of that? Yeah? All right. How about this one? Have you ever... No disrespect intended here. Have you ever postponed going to the bathroom because you didn't have your phone with you? Anyone? I see people at work. They start into the bathroom, they stop, they turn around, they disappear, and here they come back a few minutes later. I know where they're going. They're going to get their phone, right? Can't go to the bathroom without your phone in your hand, right? How about this one? Raise your hand. If you cannot remember the last time you went the whole day without checking your phone. Can't remember how long it's been, right? I actually do remember because one of the side benefits of going backpacking in the mountains, there's no cell signal. So you don't check your phone because there's nothing to check because it's not working, right? It's not happening. So when Bill and I were in the mountains, that was the last time that I went a whole day without checking my phone. Do you ever find yourself finishing sentences for slow talkers? I did a job interview. I had this happen. The gentleman was talking very, very, very slow, and I was trying to help him finish his sentences just so that we could move the conversation along, right? Do you ever switch lanes because the one that you're in is too slow, right? I do that on the interstate all the time, right? And just a quick tip. Look, if you're in the grocery store and you ever see me standing in line, you know my goal is to pick the fastest line. So if you see me standing in line, pick a different one because I promise you the one I'm in is not the fastest one. I always get slowed up there, right? Now, we laugh about this little quiz, and it's fun to kind of chuckle about. But the truth is, it's hard for us to slow down. And what's more, we really don't mind admitting it. right? We mentioned that last week, Sometimes we consider it kind of a badge of importance. Like, look how busy I am. Look how important I am. We've come to accept it and maybe even use it to validate our own importance. We're living in a time where people feel completely exhausted, completely worn out, not just physically, but the mental fatigue from all the distractions we're constantly bombarding ourselves with. It takes its toll on us. If you've ever spent any time reading the Gospel of Mark, which, plug for next week, I want you to do that. Okay, we're getting ready to start a new series through the Gospel of Mark, so your assignment this week is to go home and at least read chapter 1. I'd love for you to read the whole book, and then we'll come back and pick up some chapters as we go through, but at the very least, go home and read Mark chapter 1. But when you read through the Gospel of Mark, you're going to get a sense that the Gospel of Mark was written quickly. Not like Mark was in a hurry when he wrote it down, like I got to get this written down because it's going to go to the publishers before, if I don't get this done by due date. Not that thing, but what I mean here by written quickly is that things are moving along from one scene to another. It's like bing, bang, boom. We're here, we're there, now we're somewhere else. And in fact, as we read through the Gospel of Mark, we'll find one of his favorite words, one of his favorite transitions is the word immediately. Mark says that a lot. Immediately this, immediately that. So it's moving. Maybe that's one of the reasons why I like that gospel, is because it just seems like it has kind of a good, fast-paced narrative to Jesus' life. And yet, Mark makes it very clear for us to see that these rhythms of life that we talked about last week, that God has introduced us, Jesus lived his life with a certain rhythm. So in Mark chapter 1, Mark moves very quickly with an introduction to John the Baptist as the forerunner to Jesus, to Christ's baptism, to his temptation in the wilderness, his calling of the disciples. He casts out an evil spirit. He heals all kinds of people. And by the time you get to verse 33 of chapter 1, Jesus is so popular that the whole town is coming to the house where he's staying just to see all the amazing things that Jesus is doing. Nobody knows how late into the night that actually went, but what you get the sense of is that it was a really, really long day for Jesus. All right, and yet Mark chapter 1 verse 35 says this: before daybreak the next morning, Jesus got up and he went out to an isolated place to pray. There's that rhythm that we're talking about. Now, there's two ways you could look at this. You could say that in spite of all of the demands being placed on Jesus, he made time to pray. Or you could say that because of all the demands being placed on him, he made time to pray. Either way, Jesus made prayer part of the rhythm of his life. He needed to do that. And if Jesus needed to do that, don't you think we need to do that also? That we need that time. In spite of the demands or because of the demands, either way, we need that time with the Father. In the very next chapter, Mark chapter 2, we read this. Jesus is saying to them, the Sabbath was made to meet the needs of people and not people to meet the requirements of the Sabbath. In other words, God set up this rhythm called the Sabbath day because he knew that we needed rest. And he knew we weren't going to be very good at doing that, right? So he says, okay, look, here's a day. This day, I want you to worship. I want you to rest. You need this. Why? Because he cared about us. You realize that? God gives us a day of rest because he cares about us. He loves us that much. He purposely sets aside an entire day for us. He makes rest a rhythm of life. Not to put a burden on us, Jesus says, but to be a blessing for us. Then you skip ahead to Mark chapter 6. In Mark chapter 6, this is a really busy time in Jesus' life, all right? In his ministry, right? Things are firing on all cylinders. His popularity, he's gone viral. He's got everybody in the world interested in him. People are coming out from all over the place. He's been teaching, he's been preaching, he's been healing, he's doing all these things, right? And the disciples who are with him, they're tired. I mean, they're tired, they're worn out, they're hungry, might even say hangry, right? And you would think that this would be a time where Jesus, He sees the momentum of the ministry. He sees the impact that he's having amongst all the people. He knows he's on a limited time frame. You think, you know what? Hey, this is the time that he just needs to push through. He needs to keep going. He needs to get her done. After all, there's so many people with so many needs, we just got to plow through. So, hey, fellas, look, I know you're tired, but hang in there with me. Try to stay focused. We've got to get through this. Come on, guys, let's do this. You think that that would be what Jesus would do. And yet, this is what we find in Mark 6:31. Jesus says, hey, guys, let's go off by ourselves to a quiet place and rest a while. He said this because there were so many people coming and going that Jesus and his apostles didn't even have time to eat. That's how busy they were. And I read that verse and I think, wow, that's a great verse. That's a great verse. You know why it's a great verse? Because Jesus sees that they're tired. He sees that they're worn out. He knows they can't keep up this pace much longer. And so you know what he does? He blows the whistle and he calls a timeout. He says, time out here, guys. Y'all come with me. Let's go. Y'all come with me. We're going to take a break. We're going to get some rest. And this is Jesus' invitation for each of us today. Maybe you came in here this morning feeling like, you know what? Every time I come to church, every time I hear a sermon, every time I listen to a lesson or a word from God, you know, all I hear is, you know, I got to do more. I got to do more, right? I'm just not doing enough for the Lord. And the things that I did do, well, I could have done those better. And we get on this mindset, right? And it becomes exhausting, like we can't live up to it. And Jesus gives us a completely different kind of invitation. He says, come get away with me. Let's go to a quiet place. Let's rest. He knows how we're made. He was with God in the beginning. And apart from Him, nothing was made that has been made. And nobody understands better the necessity of a restful rhythm of life than Jesus does. It is so critical for us. Kyle Idleman is a minister in Louisville at Southeast Christian Church. I've been following him for years. He's a tremendous preacher. He shared a metaphor that illustrates our tendency to live life without any space, without any margin in our lives. And when I saw it and I heard it, I listened to it first, and then I went back and I watched it on video. And I was like, wow, that makes a lot of sense to me. And it really spoke well to probably most of our situations in life. So I just thought, you know what, I'm going to share it with you this morning. So I'm going to put this up on the wall, and I want you to just take a minute, and I want you to read it. Just read it. Now, for those of you who, all right. If you're struggling to read this, let me spill it out for you here. It says this: this sentence may be difficult for you to read quickly because of all the punctuation marks and spaces have been removed. Raise your hand in the air if you've read this far, not that hand, the other hand. Some of you have read this far, but you still haven't raised your hand. You're probably the same people who only wash their hands in the bathroom if someone else is there to witness it. Now, there is, I got to sneeze here. Okay, I lost it. It'll come back. There's no theology, there's no deep religious truths in that paragraph. It's just a few sentences that are thrown together. But here's why it is a great visual metaphor for our situation today. You see, up until about 1,200 years ago, this is the way that language was put together. This is the way that it was structured. It was just a bunch of capital letters, no spaces, no punctuation. There were no periods or commas or anything like that. It was just all this stuff smushed together. All right? And then someone came along and said, you know what? We should put some space in here. We should put some margin in here. We probably need a little punctuation in these writings. And you know what? Here's the thing. At first, People didn't like it. You know why? Because it wasn't what they were used to. Well, we can't change. We've always done it this way. Right? And so they didn't like it. They had grown up with everything being compressed together. No spaces, no margins. That's what they were used to. And that's what they had come to accept as being normal. That's normal. When I see that, I go, you know what? That's normal. And when you look at my life and I look at your life and our lives look like that paragraph, you know what we say to each other today? That's normal. If you're not running at breakneck speed, if you're not maxed out in every minute of your calendar of every day, what do we think? Well, what's wrong with them? Or as Bill says, he wants to be retired, right? we think that this is normal. But it changed, okay? And once folks began to get used to it, it began to make a lot of sense. And they saw how beautiful it was and how beneficial it was. At first it was weird. At first it was uncomfortable, even forced. But eventually it all started to make sense when they put the spaces and the punctuation in. And I think our lives are a lot like that. That's where we are in our lives today. We have grown up with everything going so fast, all crammed and smushed together, that we're just not used to living life with space. We're not used to living life with margin. Let me ask you a question. I just thought of this just now. You're on your way to work tomorrow and you have a flat tire. How many of you are going to be late? Yeah. I am. I know Bree will be. Huh?
I'm working out tomorrow.
Okay, all right. Bree gets to work from home. So she has a flat tire. It's sitting in the parking lot all day. Right? We just, there's no margin in our calendars. There's no margin in our checkbooks, right? There's just no margin in anything anymore. Our lives are all smushed together. Our lives look like a giant run-on sentence. And then when the preacher gets up and he says, hey, why don't we try to build some space into our schedules? Why don't we try to add a little margin to our lives? Why don't we try to get a little rest in that crammed life of ours? Then we get a little stir-crazy. What are you talking about, preacher? Because it's not normal. It doesn't feel natural. It probably is actually going to be a bit forced. And yet Jesus invites us to live differently. To live differently. So last week we talked about how God ordained some daily rhythms, some weekly rhythms, some yearly rhythms for His people in the Old Testament. And people say, oh, yep, that's right, preacher, Old Testament. But you know something? Just because we are living in a New Testament era, those rhythms of rest did not suddenly get erased by the cross of Calvary. Those rhythms of life God designed for us for the long haul. Old Testament, New Testament. You know, Jesus' blood, it clearly washed away our sins, but it does not remove our need for a restful rhythm to life. We still need to honor God today by following these restful rhythms, by following these principles, having intentional times built in each day for rest, for renewal, for getting alone with God, for a Sabbath rest day at once a week where we set aside the busyness of life, get rid of the distractions in our minds, and replenish physically, emotionally, spiritually. And I'll be honest with you, I don't know what that looks like for you. All right? Here's what I will tell you. You will have to work through this yourself. Just like I have to, right? We're all in the same boat. Now, I'll say this. I've had a couple weeks head start on y'all, okay? Because I'm about 3 weeks ahead in my sermon prep. And so I started on this about 3 weeks ago, right? But here's a couple of things. I'm a guy who wants examples. Show me. So I'm just going to give you a couple examples. You don't have to adopt any of these. Just want you to know some things that I've been trying to do, all right? So, now, before this series started, whenever I'd go to bed, I would take my laptop with me. I got a laptop. I'd get in, and as part of winding down, I would maybe read a little bit. But usually, I'm on my laptop. I'm checking the news feeds, any last-minute emails for work. Might have to fix something in the office real quick, and then to de-stress, I like to watch YouTube videos of guys in canoes and camping in the woods and hiking. You know, just all that kind of stuff, right? And that's what I do. But you know the problem with YouTube, right? It's like, what do they say about the old Kirby vacuum cleaners? You can suck a bowling ball from 16 feet away, right? That's the way YouTube is. It just sucks you in, right? And so when you intend to spend a few minutes winding down, all of a sudden you look at the clock and you see it's 12:32 a.m. And you go, oh my goodness, I got to get up at 5 a.m., right? So what I started to do is, don't take my laptop to bed with me. I got a book. I'm reading through a book by John Lennox on Daniel in the Old Testament. Hopefully someday that'll turn into a sermon series. No promises on that. But that's just something that I do. So that I'll read for 15, 20 minutes. Reading will put me to sleep faster than anything else. And then boom, I'm gone. I've found myself going to sleep now 30, 40 minutes earlier than I had been. I'm waking up now a little more energetic, a little more refreshed, just by getting rid of that distraction. Right? On my way home, we talked about this last week. Remember how in the ancient days, the Hebrew days, their day started at 6 p.m. So now, on my way home from work, I'm mentally preparing myself to start my day. The start of my day begins with my family. It's for fellowship. It's for relationship building, right? So that mental shift, okay? I'm consciously trying to stop looking at my phone every 60 seconds when I have a break, right? And I'm trying to stay engaged, making it a priority that every morning I'm in prayer, every morning I'm in the Word, so that I have that time with God. And I'm going to tell you, you want to test, you try doing that. Because I promise you, everything that will possibly make you late will happen, right? And then I have to make this happen twice to me just this week. Right? I'm running late, I'm running really late. I got two choices. Get to work late, or give up my prayer time, give up my Bible reading. Well, I'm fortunately the boss of my department, and so I chose to be late because I can do that occasionally. So I chose to stay in the Word. I chose to stay in prayer. But you're going to have to work through those things. You're going to have to face those things. And look, I get it. We all agree, right? This stuff is important. Nobody say, well, preacher, that stuff's not important. We all agree it's important. And we need to hear it. Let me tell you, I need to hear it. You know why I'm doing it for 2 weeks? I started last week and doing this because I needed to be told again. I needed a double reminder to slow down, to get some rest, to change my rhythm of my life. And we know we need this. It's just that, come on, preacher, you know, it's just that we've all got a lot to do, right? We've all got a lot to do right now. We got a lot of other things to be thinking about right now. And that, my friends, is the point. And that's why we're talking about this today. Because we really are too busy. We really are too distracted. So in Matthew chapter 11, Jesus shares some words I hope will be an encouragement to all of us. Words we can hold on to, words we can use to help us find that rhythm of rest that we so desperately need. So in Matthew 11, Jesus makes an invitation to people who've been exhausted by religion, all right? For way too long, the religious leaders, they have been piling on all kinds of religious burdens on the people, things that were just too hard to keep, and they were just burdening them down. They were exhausted. They were just fed up, right? And Jesus recognizes, he sees the negative impact that all of these burdens are having on people. And so Jesus says, in Matthew 11, starting in verse 28, he says, hey, come to me, all of you who are weary, all of you who are carrying heavy burdens, you come to me, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you. Let me teach you, because I'm humble and gentle at heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy to bear, and the burden I give you is light. Now I want you to notice, there's really only one prerequisite that Jesus calls out here. You know what the prerequisite is in this? That you be tired. Anybody tired? Anybody worn out? If you're weary, if you're tired, if you're heavy burdened, I get it, Jesus says, and I can help you. Some people feel like they can't come to Jesus because they're not qualified. They're not getting done what they need to get done. In other words, their religious resume isn't all that impressive. You know, they've got all these check boxes in their mind and their head that they need to get checked that, quite frankly, they just aren't checked. They've failed here, they failed there. They don't have this one, they don't have that one. And Jesus says, hey, come on. Come on. If you're weary, if you're tired, I can help you. See, here's the thing about Jesus. Jesus is looking at these people, and he's saying, you know something? I'm not like everyone else. I'm different. I'm not like what you see around you all the time. I'm gentle. I'm humble in heart. You ever been around someone who's not that way? You've been around somebody who's just the opposite of that? You know, instead of being gentle, they're harsh. Instead of being humble, they're critical. What's that like? It's anything but restful, right? It just adds stress. You know, dealing with people who are harsh and critical in spirit, it's draining. It empties us out. It depletes our energy. But Jesus says, hey, look, I'm not like that. I'm gentle. I'm humble. You come to me and you'll see I'm different. And then to help illustrate that, he paints this picture of a yoke. He says, my yoke is easy. All right? Now, we don't use these today because we have tractors, right? We've got nice, wonderful tractors to pull plows and mowers and all kinds of fancy farming utilities. And so we don't see these much anymore. But back then, there was no such thing as Kubota or John Deere or International or Ford, right? All they had were animals. And so what they would do is they would hook two animals together with this piece of wood, this wooden device here called a yoke. And they would generally take a more experienced animal, pair it with a less experienced animal, or maybe they would take a stronger animal and pair it with an animal who was not quite so strong, so that together they could do the work. And Jesus says, look, I'm inviting you to join up with me, to pair up with me, to take my yoke. You yoke up with me. Why? Because my yoke is easy. And notice he says, my yoke is easy. He didn't say your life would be easy. He says his yoke is easy. There is a strength that we will find when we're paired up with Jesus that we will not have on our own. Doesn't mean everything in life is going to be suddenly going smooth and straightforward and no problems, no issues. Doesn't mean that. But what it does mean is we're not alone. Jesus is with us. And we get the benefit of his strength, of his power, of his companionship. So to wrap this up, I want to ask you a few questions just to see, right? So we introduced the idea of rest and distractions last week and say, I really want to do a better job of resting. And so how you doing on that? We're going to give you a little quiz here. Just going to ask some questions because, a lot of us, we think that rest is just the absence of activity. Right? In other words, not doing something, or maybe sitting on the couch playing video games or binge watching some show or something like that. So, when it comes to rest, how are you doing? How are you doing with your rest? Question number 1. Does it replenish me physically? Is my body getting the physical recovery that it needs? Do I actually feel rested? And if not, why not? What adjustments do you need to make to fix that? I was not resting well. Well, you know what? I increased my sleep significantly when I shut the lid on the laptop and stopped watching YouTube before I go to bed. Right? If you're not resting well, figure out what it is that's causing you not to rest well and address that. Question number 2. Does your rest restore you emotionally? Think about this one a minute. There are a lot of things that can drain us emotionally, even while we're supposedly resting physically. Social media, big distractor here. If you're on the phone or tablet or whatever device and you're seeing what others have that you don't, what others are going places that you can't, when they're saying things that they shouldn't, all of that creates anxiety. It creates a burden on us emotionally, and it distracts from the kind of rest that Jesus wants us to experience. Question number 3. Does it reconnect me relationally? And this is a big one. I like this one. Throughout the Old Testament, rest was almost always done with the understanding that it's something you do with other people. And I don't think we get that sometimes, all right? We can do this together. Now, sometimes the rest is solitary. Jesus did go off by himself to a solitary place, right? He would get alone with God. But a good bit of the time, like when you honor the Sabbath day or when you keep the yearly rhythms that the Old Testament talks about, all of those things, they were done in community. right? You know, I watch a lot of guys on YouTube who do solo backcountry hiking and canoeing. They're by themselves, and they're very relaxing for me to watch. But I'm never going to go off in the woods by myself and hike up a mountain or canoe some lake or river alone, right? I want the community. That's not for me. Those trips are very restful for me, but I want the community of Bill and Jason and anybody else that wants to come along with us when we go up in the mountains and experience a restful experience, or out on a lake somewhere in Timbuktu. Back in 1967, that was the year I was born, there was a group of technology experts, and they appeared before the United States Senate because they had a very serious concern. These were technology experts, and they said, hey, look guys, you need to be aware of something. Our technology is going to be so advanced in 20 years that people are only going to be working 32 weeks a year on average and only 22 hours a week. And they're going to be retiring by the time they're 40. Technology is going to save us so much time. And the number one challenge that they predicted, and this is what they were going to the Senate for because they got to get this figured out, right? The number one problem they predicted is that Americans would be faced with having too much excess time. But boy, did they blow that one big. They were off. They weren't anywhere near any ballpark, let alone this particular ballpark. They got it wrong. Not only has technology not given us more free time, it's done just the opposite of that. I live in that world. It's what I do for a living. It pays my bills. And I can tell you, technology does not give us more free time. It does just the opposite. Technology allows us to cram more and more and more into less and less and less time so that we can do more and more and more. Whatever time technology supposedly gave us, it has taken as much or more away from us. And what's more is the damage that it's done to relationships. I don't know how long ago it was. I'll close with this. UCLA did a study, 32 families. UCLA studied 32 families over a period of 4 years, okay? And they followed them around. They recorded video, 1,600 hours of video per family throughout those 4 years. When it was all done, they were stunned not only by the hectic pace at which people live their lives, but also by their disconnectedness. The video is rolling. A man walks into his house after work. The kids are already in bed. His wife is working in the kitchen. There's no kiss. There's not even a hello. And they simply pick up their argument from breakfast about who left the food out on the counter the night before. They both lay in bed on their phones, scrolling until one of them falls asleep. In another clip, a mother is heading out to work. She's going to the office. Her elementary school daughter refuses to look up from her iPad. The nanny finally then prompts her and says, hey, say goodbye to your mom, which she then does without ever looking away from her device. They found that very few families had any unstructured time. Only one of the 32 families actually did something consistently together, like take a walk as a family or have a family meal together on a regular basis. 5 of the families were never in the same room at one time. Think about that. 5 families, over 4 years, 1,600 hours of videotape, and not one single minute were they caught together. And so our challenge for us is to be intentional in our consistency with relationships. Relationships need to be a priority. We need to schedule some unstructured time to structure unstructuredness in our relationships. And that's hard, but it is so necessary. You know, when was the last time you said, you know what, I'm going to set aside next Saturday just to be available? Just to be available. I'm not going to book anything. I'm just going to be available. Somebody might have a need. I might need to help out with somebody. I'm not going to go searching for it. I'm just going to make sure that I have the margin to help if somebody has a need. You ever done that before? Final question, does it renew me spiritually? Does it help me reconnect with God? Our rest needs to do that. Our rhythm of life needs to do that. Psalm 46:10, be still and know. Be still and know that I am God. I will be honored by every nation. I will be honored throughout the world. Do you have stillness in your life? Do you have those moments where you remind yourself that this life really isn't about you? It's about the King of Kings and Lord of Lords? Are you engaging the author of life through prayer and worship and Scripture? God is God, and we are not. So a couple weeks ago, I needed Brandon's help. We were rearranging some furniture, and so he helped me. We had this big table downstairs, and we needed to get it upstairs and take a piece that was upstairs and downstairs. So I said, Brandon, can you come help me? He's like, yeah, no problem. And Cheryl was watching Ben, and so Brandon and I, we went downstairs. We get this table, and of course Ben wants to help, right? Ben is 2? Yeah, Ben's 2. And Ben wants to help. So, and it was an awkward table. It was a little bit of a heavy table. And so I've got one end and Brandon's got the other. And here's Ben standing right here in the middle. And I mean, you can see his face and he's just trying to lift. He's got a hold of that table and he is helping, right? And so here Brandon and I, we're trying to turn the corner and get up the stairs. And Ben is right there and he's stumbling around. But he's got his hand on that table because he's helping, right? And Cheryl, she sees all this going down and she starts chuckling to herself. And I know what she was chuckling about, right? Because it was really cute. And Ben really thought he was helping. But he was not contributing, was he? And I wonder, does God look at me sometimes when He sees me trying to do all of this stuff, cram all these activities into my life, thinking that I'm actually contributing here, while He just shakes His head, laughing at me because I think I'm the one carrying the load? How ridiculous is that? I'm not carrying the load. He's carrying the load. And when we can get to the point where we recognize that it's not on us, it's not on me, I'm called to honor God. I'm called to glorify God. I'm called to give Him my very best. And at the end of the day, you know what? I can't move the table. That's why Jesus said, hey, you come yoke up with me. You come join up with me. Because when I'm weak, He is strong. Only He can move the table. His yoke is easy. His burden is light. And He invites you, He invites me to partner with Him. Because here's the deal. The table only gets moved when He moves it. And our lives only become more restful. Our rhythms only become better when Jesus is our rest. When He is our life. All right, that's it. Let's all stand. Let's pray. We'll stop there. God, having a rhythm of rest is challenging. It's difficult. It's hard sometimes. But we need it. We so need it. Would you help us to have the faith to trust in your word? You've shown us that it's possible. And Lord, we know you're the only one who can move the table. And so, Lord, help us to yoke up with you. Please, in Jesus' name, amen.